Hi, my name is Jim Connell, and I am here with Phil Kweton, who is the owner, founder of Sheet Metal Supply Company in Grayslake, Illinois. We are going to talk about growing the business, founding the business, and we're going to talk a little bit about manufacturing. Tell me about the genesis of Sheet Metal Supply. How did it start? When did the idea come to your mind? Tell me a little bit about that story.
To digress on that thought, I got a college degree. I returned to the Chicago area where I was born and raised and went to work for a major materials manufacturer, United States Gypsum, in downtown Chicago. It was in an office environment and was a good first job for me. It was an introduction into large corporations. And stayed there for 3 or 4 years, ended up moving on to several other jobs that I thought I would enjoy, and ended up with a fellow whose family owned an industrial roofing company. And it was a flaw in my life that I was at a point in my life where I was chasing money. And the money sounded good, and boy, I know I'll enjoy it because I'll be financially a little better off. Well, after years in that business, I really figured out that I didn't like the business. It had an air of corruption to it. There were so many things you couldn't control that it was a very, very difficult environment. Like farmers, like the ag industry, you were dependent on weather. You're dependent on lower skilled labor, and it's a difficult mix to deal with. To this day, they struggle with that environment. One thing I always enjoyed about that, and really was the springboard to getting into sheet metal, architectural sheet metal fabrication, was that we always had to use a perimeter metal with low slope roof systems, all flat roof systems. And there was a place in Libertyville where I lived at the time who was owned by two older brothers by the name of Don and Jake Weber, and they started their company after World War II, and they were primarily in the heating and industry and heating end of sheet metal, where they would make their own plenums and ductwork. But when we needed metal, we'd just go there, and they would bed up a piece of gravel stop or coping cap, and that was it. It was a very small operation, and after buying from them for probably close to 10 years, I went to them and I said, "How long are you guys going to keep doing this?" And they said, "Well, actually, Don's supposed to be retiring next year and Jake is already retired, but they were still working." So we talked to them a bit about buying them, and for a variety of reasons that didn't happen. So someone else bought them, and I continued to buy from the new owners and realized that perhaps I'd made a mistake not doing that. So set my craw for another year or two, and finally I thought, I'm going to do this. So I shut down the roofing company, and I bought a handbrake from Roper Whitney and a jump shear. I think the total investment was like $3,500. And I can remember picking up the brake and bringing it back and putting it down on the garage floor and cutting the bands, and thought, okay, what happens when you move this piece? Oh, that happens. Okay, what about when you put on the counterbrakes? Oh, that makes that work. So I had never physically touched a brake in my life before having bought one and set it down on that floor. But I thought, and I've always had this idea, and I don't know if it's a bit of delusion on my part, but I've always thought there are certain things that I look at and I think, I can do that, or I can figure out a way to do that better, and it's a wonderful attribute to have. It's also a dream chaser, in effect. But anyway, it started out right away, and the one really great springboard for me, and that was after being in the roofing industry for so many years, I knew a lot of my competitors, and a lot of them were just good people. And I called them and I said, hey, I'm out, but can I quote on your perimeter metal? And I didn't have one guy I called, of which there were many, who said, wow, nobody's ever asked me that question before. I said, well, I'm asking you that, and if I can give you a quote, I'd like to earn your business. So it amazed me that it was such an open business that had never really been approached with any type of business savvy at all. It was, everyone seemed at that point in time that if it was a really large roofer, they would have their own captive sheet metal department. If it was the mid-tier or lower, they just went to their local guy who did sheet metal, and it might be plenums and ductwork, or it might be something a little more sophisticated than that, but that's where they'd get it done. And it was such a small part of an entire job that it wasn't a focus for a contractor to say, wow, I've really got to nail down this metal price because it's exorbitant. It might be exorbitant, but I figured out over time that metal typically was 2% of the cost of doing a flat roofing job. So when you're going to chase areas that you could perhaps have some savings on the buy side of doing a project, metal was not one of them. It was more based on reliability, consistency of product, quality of product, and people who wanted your business. So from there, it just, I can remember I would start in the morning on the phone, and
This is at your house?
no, I'd rented a building in Libertyville.
Okay, gotcha.
The building was big. That's a whole nother story, but I met this gentleman and he had a building for rent, and it was 5,000 square feet. And it was way too big for me, but I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do it anyway. So I met the man, and he was an old Libertyville fella.
What's the address of this place?
It was 551 North Avenue.
Okay.
And it is actually right next to the Libertyville town garage. And so did you see the scoreboard in our shop?
I don't recall.
Eric, did you?
Yes.
Okay.
The scoreboard.
Well, we have a scoreboard that we were right across the street from Parks and Rec at that point.
Oh,
and
yeah,
they did not have a forklift, so whenever they got a delivery and they needed it unloaded, they'd come knocking on our door. Would you help us out for a minute? I said, sure. So I was in there one Sunday doing paperwork, and I happened to notice this scoreboard that was slumped out of the back of a dump truck. I thought, wow, that's pretty fascinating. And so I went over to knock down the door the next Monday morning and talked to the fellow, and I said, what are you doing with that sign? He said, well, it was the oldest one in the whole Libertyville system, and the bank in town donated a new one, so we're scrapping that one. I said, oh, well, could I buy it, or could I have it? He said, well, I can't do that. It has to be, the village has to approve my donating it or whatever.
Yeah.
I said, well, I'd be happy to buy it if that's the case. I'm getting off on a tangent.
That's okay.
Phoebe told you I love to talk.
That's okay.
So anyway, he said, okay, I'll let you know. So about 2 weeks later, knock on the door. I was there by myself, and knock on the door. I go answer, yeah, what's up? It's this guy, and he hands me a controller. He said, it's all yours. So this was the controller for this fairway sign. So anyway, it was winter time, and I thought, well, this would be a good. Oh, first of all, I thought I was going to scrap it because it was aluminum and it'd be a few bucks. Then I got to looking at it, and I thought, this is really cool. Of course, it didn't work too well, so I called Fairway with the serial number, and they said, that sign's like 40 years old. And I said, can I get parts for it? And they said, no, but I'm going to give you the name of two boneyards. One's in California and the other one's in Michigan. And they buy these old Fairway signs and either refurbish them and sell them to smaller markets, like small towns that can't afford the new ones, or they will junk them. And so I told them what I needed. A week later, everything came, spent tinkering around with it in the wintertime, and now it works. So anyway, every place we've moved, from Libertyville to Lincolnshire to Mundelein to Grays Lake, more people asked us questions about our move relating to where you're going, No, that was not the number
What are
one
you doing
question.
with the
Number
sign?
one question was, what are you doing with the scoreboard? And so it's become a fixture. I don't know how I got off on that, but anyway.
That's great. That's a cool little Libertyville story.
It's
too.
a fun Libertyville story.
Do you know what school it was at, Phil?
It was from, what's the park that is on Lake Street?
Butler?
Butler Park,
Butler.
from Butler Park.
Okay.
And so I would get up in the morning and go in and work the phones a little bit, and then if I had an order, I'd go ahead and mark it up. And in the process of doing it in those days, it was so primitive, you would slit these blanks down to a certain width that you needed, and then you would, what you'd call prick punch, the marks on that blank, and then two people would get on this manual brake, move it to a prick punch point, and then lock it down, and then bend it to a degree, all very manual, and then you'd finish up with the part. And that evening, I would deliver it wherever it was going, and the next morning start out doing the same thing.
So were you just doing local biz?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
we would go Chicago market. I mean, we would take stuff. Wherever it went with the roofers we were working with, they were all Chicago area roofers
Okay.
at that point in time. So, yeah, that was the routine, and thank goodness, and I will say this, at most nights, son Ben would come over and be working the other end of the brake at that point. You needed two people to work these handbrakes. So, very fortunately, things got busier. And I can remember one of my great success stories is that about the third year in business, I started out and I worked 100-hour work weeks from like March through Thanksgiving, at which point my mother insisted that I come to Thanksgiving dinner. And, but I'm very proud to say too, that I don't think I ever missed an athletic event of either Ben or Phoebe. If I'd break off in the afternoon, I'd always go back in the evening. But anyway, those were fun years. They were exciting just because I enjoyed what I was doing. I enjoyed the people I was working with, customers, and I could see, it was interesting. The very first year, I have this green journal that I bought at what was Staples at the time. I don't even know what it was. But, and I'd enter in every order number, and at the end of the year, I looked and I'd done $50,000 worth of business. And I thought, well, that's not enough to make a living on, but the margins were all good, so the solution to that is sell more. So it's a matter of just working a little bit harder and getting more contacts, and so we had really great success because you'd take care of people, you'd be concerned about them, you'd call them and say, how did that project work? Is there something we could do better to make our product more usable for you, easier to install, make it look better at the end? Always trying to figure out how we can get a competitive edge over the guy making ductwork that they were buying from. And I also thought, well, a lot of guys were really reluctant, a lot of roofers, to put their own metal on. So what they would do is they would hire a firm to install the metal for them. And so we'd ship the metal to the job, and then this other contractor, subcontractor, would come over and install the metal. And I've said to them, why are you doing that? And they would, the uniform response was, because we haven't got anybody qualified to put this stuff on. So then I started a program. I said, okay, you buy from me, I'll come out, I'll measure your metal, I'll make it up, and I'll come and I'll spend one day with your crew putting it on. And give me two good guys who are detail oriented, and you'll be so pleased with this, you'll never go back to your old established routine. So that worked very well. And
I bet it did.
Picked up a whole bunch of new customers, and it was nice too, because roofing labor, for the most part, isn't the most stable career environment. So these guys would jump from one shop to another. One would be slow, so they'd go to another one. And with that, your name seemed to pollinate throughout the industry, which was really nice. So, business grew,
Keep going. Yep.
and I love this story. There's a machinery dealer now in Schaumburg called Gladwin Machinery. They have 5 locations throughout the Midwest, but I can remember that this guy who bought Weber Metals had this machine called a roto die, and I had a hand brake, and I had been in their shop many times, and what this roto die did was you would set the machine for a certain angle and a certain bend. And if you had, let's say, 100 pieces of metal that you needed to make for a specific project, and you had 5 bends, you'd set the machine for the first bend A. You'd do all 50 blanks and then set it there. Then you'd readjust the machine, then same 50 blanks for bend B, then C, then D, then E, and at the end of the number of bends, voila, your project was done and ready to deliver. So I happened to notice that Gladwin had a used roto die for sale. And I thought, bingo, I'm going down there. So I called and I met Bill Marinan, who to this day is a good friend. And I went down there, made an appointment, and I said, you've got this used roto die, I'd like to see this thing. He said, yeah, come on down, we'll show it to you. So he showed me, he said, okay, what are you going to do with this thing? I said, well, make perimeter edge for roofs. So it could be gravel stop, drip edge, coping, counter flashing. He said, you don't want this. I said, I don't? Well, what do I want? So he takes me over to this machine. It was beautiful. I mean, it was like, you know, when you think about like a machine that had lights on it and it almost like sparkled, it was huge. And he said, you need an auto brake. And I said, what's an auto brake? And he said, well, it's a computer guided folding machine. I said, okay, what does it do? He said, well, right over here on this little pad, you put in your program for each bend, what the degree is you want to bend, and where you wanted that bend to take place in the blank. And it had a back gauge on it that you'd put it in, it'd go to the back gauge that the computer had set, and then it would press a couple buttons and it would bend. Then automatically the back gauge would move, and all of a sudden, before you knew it, before you were through, you may flip it or turn it, but you would have a finished part, all sequentially folded and done. Wow, that's pretty fancy. And he said, yeah, he said, this is state of the art. I said, wow. I said, this was wintertime. And I said,
What year was this, Phil?
this would have been about 1993, maybe.
Okay.
And maybe 94. And I said, well, great, Bill, how much one of these things cost? He said, about $70,000. I said, wow, that's really great. Have you got any literature on it? And he said, sure, I'll get you some. Well, I'm walking out to my car after I shook his hand and said, thanks very much. And I thought, it's going to be a cold day in hell before I ever spend $70,000 on a piece of equipment. We now have 10, I believe, of much higher capabilities than that first original one that we had. So they were game changing. You use one person instead of two. Mm-hmm. They were much more accurate. And it allowed me to be able to do the project by myself rather than relying on outside help or Ben or anything like that.
I want to ask you about this because when you go back to the original place that you had, and sounded like you were doing a lot of stuff on your own. You were getting accustomed to being the guy in the plant, but you were also, sounds to me like you're a natural salesman, by the way.
Well, thank you. I don't know about it.
But you were selling and establishing relationships. So when was that moment where you just said, man, I can't do this by myself and I need some help? Can you tell me a little bit about the growth?
I would have to say it was that 1 year where we went to February to Thanksgiving, mm-hmm. where I had worked. All I did was work, and if I wasn't at work, I'd be going to some sporting event mm-hmm. for my kids. But other than that, all I did was work, and it all of a sudden, for a single proprietor, all of a sudden it's like, wow, this thing is starting to get some legs. And physically, and at that point in time I was probably in my mid-40s, and even at that point I realized there's more to life than this. I mean, I really feel so blessed that I've got this opportunity, but I can't keep this pace up forever. So actually, my method of trying to approach new help was to call CLC. And I said, do you have a job board? Do you list jobs? And they said, yeah. And I said, okay, here's my job. And so many years ago, I don't even remember what the procedure was, but I got a couple calls. And, and I said, it's part-time, you can almost choose your hours, and here's the rate, and I can't even remember what it was, but I'm sure it wasn't much, but there was a lot of flexibility. And I think for a young person going to junior college and probably trying to find a little money, it was a good opportunity. Well, found a couple young people, and they were okay. They were young. The important thing for me was that they were reliable. When they said they were going to be there, they were there. And as far as requiring any kind of rocket science intelligence, it wasn't necessary. So it's just reliability, I think, was
consistency,
more important.
reliability.
Yeah. So that was great. So that went on for a number of years, and then continued to grow. And at that point, got to the point where Ben graduated from college, and I love telling this story too. I haven't got a job, but can I work with you until I get one? I said, sure. He's still there. But he's been really very instrumental in what's going on there, as has daughter Phoebe, and we're morphing into a whole nother area, which I'd like to touch on more further down the pike. But we continued to grow. We moved to a second location in Libertyville, thinking we'd be able to run 2 shops, and that did not work. And so then we found a place in Lincolnshire that was like 12,000 feet. And I can remember buying that and thinking, this is so great, we are never going to have to move again. This is just wonderful. And at the time it was. I mean, it really, compared to the place I started this had a area that I used for a shop that was probably 12 feet by 20 feet long, and did all the work in there, and it had its own garage door, and then morphed into that 5,000 feet, and then moved to the second location in Libertyville, and then the 12,000 feet was like heaven sent. So we were there for, I want to say, probably 5 or 6 years, and then realized we needed more space, and moved again to Mundelein to 30,000 feet, and then we're there for another 10 years or so, and then we're bursting the walls out there and moved up to Grays Lake. That's about 85,000 square feet. And now
so
we're
12 to 30 to 85?
5 to 12 to 30 to 85. And at the 85 move, that was sort of an interesting move to Grays Lake, because we had this huge place. I mean, it was 3 times the size of where we were moving from virtually, and I thought, man, this is just great. So I thought, in my lifetime, we're never moving again. This is just great. So we got settled in there, and initially it was very comfortable. And now we're at the point where it's becoming to the top of the list of things to deal with, and that's more space. We really need more space. And I think that Ben was the one who has made the comment that every time we've gotten to the point where we're in this situation, the only thing limiting our growth is having a larger facility where we can bring in more machinery to up our manufacturing capabilities, either in types of products that we can make or volumes. So that's where we're at again, and it's really a wonderful problem to have. So it's been a really interesting ride. It's been a wonderful ride. I mean, I look at myself as being the luckiest SOB in town, I can tell you that. I grew up in a western suburb of Chicago. It's the first planned community in the country, I believe, of Riverside.
Riverside, okay.
And it's 22 miles west of the Loop. It was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. And it was the first laid out. I mean, they had the whole town laid out before it became a town. And it's in an exquisite setting, and the Des Plaines River moves through the town.
That's where the big park was.
Yeah, there's
right.
a big park, Swan Pond, and I mean, it's...
Didn't he do Central Park?
Pardon?
Didn't he do Central
Yes,
Park?
he did Central
Yeah,
Park, yes.
Yeah.
And so he had quite a name for himself. And so Riverside filled up, and we didn't happen to live in one of them, but there are homes and what they considered summer homes of some of the magnates of large corporations in Chicago.
Okay.
And most of them are still standing to this day, and at that time you see a 5,000 square foot clapboard sided, really beautifully architectured home in Riverside, sitting in an idyllic setting of oak trees that are 100 years old. It's very impressive. It's just beautiful.
What did your mother and father do for work?
My dad is an interesting character study. He really was a remarkable guy. His dad died when he was 11. And he was an only child. They lived in Chicago. My grandmother, his mother, had no job skills, and so she ended up working in the cafeteria of the high school he went to, Lindblom High School. And I don't know what the motivation was to have him do this, but he wanted to go to college. So he put himself through Northwestern.
Wow.
And was graduated with an engineering degree. And I've also found this very interesting, that he worked the last probably 35 years of his career for what started out as Goss Press. They made printing presses for the large newspapers.
Okay.
And the Sun-Times building, I remember going down there with him when they were installing these presses, and they were so large that they put the presses in and then built the building around it, which was really
right?
a unique construction at that point in time.
Wow.
Yeah, these presses were bigger than this room. I mean, and you watch the paper whir through there, and it was just a blur. It was really fascinating. So he worked for them for, I want to say, probably 40 years. And in looking back through their records, he retired at $38,000 a year. Now, granted, $38,000 probably then was a lot more than it is now, but the fact that he put 3 kids through college, lived in a modest but wonderful community, and my mother passed away last year at 102, and he died at 89, she died at 102, and I was getting the concerned because she was getting to the point where she was just starting to run out of money. And it was very selfish on my part, and I thought, well, if it happened, it's okay, I'm fortunate I can pay for it, but she clocked out almost according to her bank book, which was, in the overall scheme of life, you never want to be a burden on your kids, and she didn't, but that's the way it happened. And I thought, how did a guy who never made more than $38,000 a year able to live in a retirement home she was the longest living residence in this retirement home. At the end, it was $4,000 a month. It's like, I don't know, maybe he had a side gig going or something. Yeah. I don't know, but I was very impressed with his many management skills that he was able to do that.
That's great.
But they were, so my dad put himself through Northwestern, and my mother was a homemaker. She did a lot of volunteer work in Riverside. She was head of the Historical Society. She was on school boards, and it was just a wonderful place to grow up. I graduated from the high school there and then went off to Miami of Ohio and got a degree in marketing. And I think this is an interesting time to segue on that. In that, as I said, my folks weren't wealthy, but their priorities were that their kids get an education, and so all three of us did. And but I look back on those years at Miami, which is a great school. It was well regarded in the business community in this area, I think.
For sure.
But I look back and I can remember a couple classes, but short of that, it was just like a madcap, like, I won't use the word, but just a time in your life where you just were on a hiatus from being responsible, I guess, is what it boils down to.
That's a nice way to put it, Phil.
There's a word for that, but I'm not going to say it.
Responsibility. My wife would say I'm on a hiatus for responsibility.
So anyway, what we're doing now, and I think Sheet Metal Supply through Phoebe and her efforts have become involved more and more with CLC, looking at it as a vehicle for coming from both directions. From the student standpoint, that it provides such a wonderful, wonderful place to start. And from an employer standpoint, to say, hey, look at me, look at us. We have opportunities that need to be filled. And that's a perfect storm for this environment. Mm-hmm. And Phoebe and I, when we were walking in, she said, "Now, Dad, I don't want you, don't discount your story." Well, my story is the people I've worked with. Phoebe is extraordinary. Ben has always been, I think, the strategist, the guy who figures out maybe this is an opportunity for the company to move forward into a new area. And right now, starting out in perimeter edges for roof systems is like, that's really, it's still a big part of our business, but it's slowly being taken over by wall skins and wall facades. And when you think about it, if you have a 10,000 square foot building that's it maybe has 300 or 400 feet of metal on it, versus a wall skin that maybe the wall is 100 feet long and 20 feet high, you've got 20,000 square feet of metal there, and it's like, wow, the demand for metal goes up exponentially when you have more surface area. So, anyway, Ben's has been really, I'm proud of him for his strategic planning, for his wanting to be involved in different areas, and some of them you look at and you go, I've invested some time in this, invested enough time to figure out this is not a good idea. Mm-hmm. But also others that have worked out where I've invested time in this and it looks like a good opportunity. And then this is the equipment we need, and then it gets dumped in Phoebe's lap because it may be $1 million laser, but it doesn't run itself. So she's in the enviable / unenviable position of being, how am I going to staff this? Where do I get labor that wants to be part of a team that is the culture that she's built at Sheet Metal Supply, that we're going to work together, we're going to profit together, and we're going to share those profits with everyone. And I think that that's a really important thing to point out. I've never gotten the idea, and I know a lot of people like this who, they start a company, they work it, they're driving Ferraris, they're living in $1.5 million, $2 million homes, and they have trouble keeping labor because they won't pay them. They won't recognize their value. And Phoebe has created a culture that is just the opposite of that. We need your help, we need your skill. If you want to commit to that, we have the best job in America for you. If you don't want to commit to that, no problem, but don't waste your time and don't waste our time.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing is, when you're 20 years old, you don't necessarily think in those terms, but I think I had an uncle who was an interesting guy. He was very bright, he was very pragmatic, and he was just a person kind of guy, and once in a while we'd sit down. He always gave me good advice, and he'd say, always have a plan. And he said, have a 1-year plan and have a 5-year plan. And the ultimate one is going to end up what it is, but if you don't have a goal in mind, you don't have any reason to get there. And I think for the most important things, and back when I was doing more of what Phoebe does now, I'd say to young people, find something you enjoy. Find some people you enjoy working with. So between what you have to do and the people you've got to do it with, it's a nice environment and you don't mind getting out of bed and going to work, as opposed to, I hate my job, but I'm going to go because I'm going to make $14 an hour. Don't do that, because you'll never be happy. Be fastidious and dogged about finding a place that values you, and be responsible enough to be valuable to someone.
How did you start laying the groundwork for sort of your philosophy in building the culture of sheet metal supply?
Well,
I'm sure it's evolved over time.
It has, and I think that Phoebe would be much more, could give you a much better idea on that. But I think that this goes back to all of life, and I was going to touch on this today with you as well. It's sometimes things are overthought, and things get too complicated because you make them complicated. But start out with a certain premises and say, okay, well, where do I want to be a year from now? Well, I want to be someplace where I'm valued. I want to be someplace where I'm making decent dough, and I'm going to be someplace where I have opportunities to grow with the company. And I want to be with a place where I'm going to enjoy the profits, some of the profits the company makes. But I don't know how many young people really think in those terms. But when you sit down with an HR team like Phoebe and lay these things out, and all of a sudden it's like a growing up moment. It's like, nobody's going to take care of me anymore. Mom's not going to have that meal waiting for me every evening. What can I do to take the burden off of them and place it on me? There's a responsibility to that. And as you and I spoke briefly before this started, the number one thing I think that any young person should have is develop a feeling of responsibility, number one to yourself, and number one to the people that you care about. If it's a family, if it's a wife, if it's your children, if it's your parents, whatever it is, you develop those things and don't ever stray from them. I mean, the path to the moon is that. The path we go to the moon is like that.
Yeah.
So,
True.
and it's all learning, and it's all, I guess, forged by our individual experiences, the people we have spent a good part of our lives with. But what I think is interesting is you don't have to have the IQ of Einstein to do well. Every person has a bucket of skills. Maybe half of that bucket is my brains, 30% of it is my brawn, 30% of it is I care, and another whatever. But there's different mixture, and it's different for everyone, this bushel basket full of shit. But anyway, the things that are going to get you to your 1-year goal, to your 5-year goal, that are in this bushel basket or this bucket, what's going to work here? Okay, well, these are the things going to work. I've got to be reliable. I've got to be safe. I've got to be learning on my job. I've got to cooperate with the people I've got to work with as a team. And I'm going to concentrate on that. And after a year, wow, things are working pretty well. And George and Louie and Sally and Mimi, they all appreciate my being there every day. because we're a team, man, and we're doing it. And you know what? As far as different areas of sheet metal supply, we're one of the teams that's hitting it out of the park. And I've only been here 6 months, but from what every one of my teammates who've been here a few years have said, you aren't going to believe the year-end bonuses, and you aren't going to believe the 401k contributions. And when they get them, they go, wow.
It's compelling.
It's compelling, and it's an eye-opener, and I think what it is, it's a great reinforcement of being responsible.
Well, I think you touched on something there too, I think that's critical for the younger folks, is the idea of exploration. And looking in that bushel basket and saying, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this. It's a lot like a business, and you know, you're going to try and you're going to fail. You're going to try and you're going to succeed.
Jim, that's an interesting point, because you are your own business.
Yeah.
You are figuring out a path of where you're going to take your skill sets and make a living, make a lifetime. That's an interesting thought, but that's absolutely true.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about, I work for myself. You know, as much as I'm working for my employer, you know, I'm self-employed in a sense that it's my responsibility.
Absolutely.
You know? And I love that concept, and I don't know how to convey that or teach that, though.
Well, you know what's interesting? I think if people get, it's like everything else in life, if it's reinforced, you tend to go back down that path. If you're walking down a path and you trip 14 out of 14 times you've been down the path, you go,
yeah,
I'm a slow learner, but I'm not doing it again. But if you walk down the other one and it's smooth and it's maybe warm sand, you say, huh, okay, this is good. This is all working into my plan. And I think the people, my grandfather told me, and I'll never forget this, there's nothing wrong with failing. I think there's such a stigma about failing. He said, nothing wrong with it. Just learn something from it.
Yeah.
And it's such an easy concept, and you know, some of it's dire, some of it of no consequence, but if you try something and you're not sure, if you try something and you know you're going to fail, then that's not good. But if you try something and you're not sure, but there's a discovery and you do fail, that's okay, you discovered something. You just became smarter by failing. There's nothing wrong with that.
The school of hard knocks or
yes,
whatever.
Exactly.
You know, they're cliches for a reason, right?
Yeah. But I think that the most important ingredient, back to what I was saying before about talking to people when they would come in for an interview back in the Stone Age when I was hiring people, find something you enjoy doing. And find some people that you feel some camaraderie, some togetherness with, and investigate those and find in that environment a place where you can thrive and give it a try. And it might be the best thing that ever happened to you. You might go down the path and trip 14 times and say, nope, but I've learned something and I'm going to go on from here, use the expertise and the knowledge that I've earned from here to move on. Another thing that I think is really interesting, and I found this to be so important through the years. When I started out with that handbrake, it was so primitive. A, you'd have to be a knucklehead to get hurt on it. And B, it was slow, and it was literally, I refer to it as the Fred Flintstone of times. Now we have equipment that to me is so fascinating. We bought a laser last year with an option that's called Shop Air. And it's a laser that is not CO2. That, from what I understand, there are two types of cutting. One of them CO2, which was the original one, used a lot of gases. The laser cuts strictly by light, and it might be gas assisted or boosted, but with Shop Air, in depending on what you're cutting, you can take regular air that's in this structure, and first a compressor bumps it to 150, then another compressor bumps it to 450, wow. And that takes the place of most of your gas usage. So your performance cost is lowered significantly. But to do all of these things, First of all, you have to order the machine, and you have to wait a year to get it. And you finally get the thing, and you prepare the floor properly for it, and you put the electrical in for it, and all of a sudden the thing ends up on the floor, and you think to yourself, that's the most expensive thing I ever bought in my life, and I don't even know how to turn it on. I mean, it's not like your phone or anything else. This thing is so sophisticated, it's like something you'd see in a heart replacement surgical suite at a hospital. So anyway, the point I'm making with that is that that machine only works if it has someone who knows how to work it. And these guys aren't coming out of Harvard or USC or Stanford. They're coming out of a CLC. And not everyone really digs learning through books, but they have an aptitude.
Yeah.
And for these people in that bushel basket who have that aptitude, they are they got their doctorate degree right in their bucket. So you bring these guys in, and they go to work with a sheet metal supply t-shirt on in the summertime and maybe a pair of shorts and safety boots and safety glasses, and they're making over 100 grand a year.
God,
Because
awesome.
they can make this machine work. And you know what? One of the most profitable profit centers at sheet metal supply is that machine that costs you $1.25 million. There's another machine we have. It's an Armada turret punch. That the original turret punches we had, what they have, a turret punch, it has a big cylinder in the middle of it with sleeves in it, and each one of these sleeves has a different die in it, and the die will punch a different thing. It might punch a slot, it might punch a hole, might punch an oval. You can punch anything. But point being, the computer will, if you want a hole here and a slot here, it'll switch this,
Rotate the die.
rotate the dies till the right one hits in the right spot. But the original ones we had were all mechanical, and I'd sit in my office and I'd hear boom, 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 all day long when this thing was running. Then it's like, you got to go look at this new machine. And what is it? Well, it's now it's a new servo-powered turret punch, and so from the boom, 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 it's and every one of them is a hit instead of the boom,
Wow.
boom, boom. So, but you've got to have a guy who knows how to run these things. And the factory will send out people for a month to train your people. They'll go there for a refresher course for a week. That's how sophisticated this stuff is. But there are people who come up to my office, how are things going? Great. Well, we just decided we're going to use, for this one particular project we're doing now, where we were doing, I don't know, 1,000 holes in a sheet of aluminum. And with the boom, 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 that might have taken 4 hours to do. Now it's done in like 30 minutes. So they decided to go from a single hit to a cluster die. So I mean, all of this stuff is so sophisticated now, but there are people who know how to make this work. There's value in that.
Absolutely.
And for them to be able to get this skill set, they've written their ticket for life.
So let me ask you, you mentioned, Phil, that you had done some work in, Karsten.
Yes.
Can you tell me just a little bit about that?
Sure. Ben and I came up one Saturday. You were having an open house when you first opened this ATC, and we were blown away. I mean, it is a remarkable facility here. A lot of emphasis on welding, which we aren't big into. Mm-hmm. We wish we were more so. We've tried to hire welders, but welders are an interesting breed in that they like to weld. They don't want to do anything else. Man, don't ask me to run that machine. Don't ask me to do anything else. I want to weld. Well, we just don't have, at this point in time, the demand for that at Sheet Metal Supply. So when we have it, either we'll do a very elementary job in our shop, or we'll farm it out to a Quasar partner who does that for us.
Yeah.
But when we came here, it was like, they also had robotics. We're just getting into that. We're blown away with the idea that someone finally has recognized the need for this type of labor. And everybody who I think really doesn't understand the whole concept of things referred to as blue collar. Well, blue collar, this guy's smarter than you are, and you're a PhD, so don't tell me he is blue collar. He's as bright as you are, just in a different way, you know, and I think that it's important that people who have these skill sets be recognized for that.
Yeah.
Not only in stature, but pay them.
Yeah.
You know, that's important. They're such an important part of a team.
Absolutely. I want to talk just briefly about, I'm intrigued by all the jobs that you do at Sheet Metal Supply. There are some very, when I think of sheet metal, I just think of, and forgive me for this, Phil, but I just think of plain old sheet metal. And when I started to learn more about your business, and actually your website's a great reference point for this, there's some fascinating projects on there that look very, from my perspective, look very complex. And also, I'm a bit of a architecture geek. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I'm very interested in it. And I've noticed that you, Sheet Metal Supply, partners and works with some very renowned architects on some very interesting and cool buildings. So how did that, is that more complex work, or is it still sort of the basics? Can you walk me through a little bit of that?
Just if we could digress 1 minute before I answer that.
Please.
I said before that Ben really is the guy who looks into our future and says, these are things we should be involved with. I think this is a good opportunity for us down the pike. And Phoebe's the one who gets handled the pile of shit when, okay, we're getting into this now.
Yeah.
We've committed to millions of dollars worth of equipment. Now find some guys to run this stuff.
Yeah.
And what's the interesting dynamic is there, you commit to it, but you've only committed to a part of it because one doesn't work without the other. So Phoebe ends up, and she's done a magnificent job. Ben has done a stellar job in his end of things. Phoebe has done a stellar job in her end of things. So going back to when we started out, it was Sheet Metal Supply, and it was, we would take sheets of sheet metal, which is thinner metal, and put it in a computer-guided folding machine, and voila, you've got your part, and then you ships out the door, you bill it, and that's it. Then we got into standing seam roofs, which we have 10 ASTM UL rated standing seam panels, which we've been doing since I think around 2000. And then the next step in was ACM panels, which is a composite panel that you can't bend in a break because it's too thick. It's about 3/16 of an inch thick. If you put it in a conventional folding or break, you would fracture the outside skin of it. It's metal with a phenolic insert and another piece of metal.
Okay.
So it's like a sandwich. And so what you have to do when you get these sheets in, if you've seen like Porsche dealers, a lot of Honda dealers, Nissan dealers, nationwide have decided that they are going to they want brand recognitions with their stores. So when you go to Boogaloo, Iowa, or you're in New York City and you see a car dealership, your mind always goes to, oh, there's a Porsche dealer up there.
Yeah.
So that was all started really, in my mind, and I may be off a little bit on this, but the idea that we really probably would be a good market for us to get into. The entry level now, we needed some huge router tables that are computer guided, but we have 3 of those now, and they're like 20 feet long and about 7 feet wide, and with a trolley that the robot actually will move as the computer tells it to. And the reason why you have to do that is to fold this stuff, you need to put a V in the back side of the metal so you're only bending the front metal so it doesn't fracture the metal when you bend it. So when you look at all these panels on this building and say, wow, that looks really nice, that's really clean and everything, people don't realize the engineering that went behind that to get it on that wall and looking so good. And that's what, you know, when you look. Another thing is flat lock tiles, and that's probably my...
Those are cool. I was looking at that too.
Those are my favorite because the look of them...
Super decorative.
Yes, and you know, whether you're using copper or zinc or painted aluminum or steel or whatever you want to make it out of, there's so many different designs, there's so many, but they interlock and they're just, to me, they're just a great look.
I didn't even know that existed until I started looking at your...
But when you know what, we've had you may want to edit this out, but we've had a running battle with the village of Grace Lake. Love the village. The village is unto itself, I think it's the most unique village. It reminds me a lot of Riverside. Walkable streets, the people are so friendly, just a beautiful environment. But they've got a fellow over there who's head of the architectural review committee who won't allow any metal. And there are metal buildings in the village that were approved decades ago, but now you go to them, and I can remember when we bought this plant, there was a back wall that fronted on the railroad tracks, and people had been back there and painted it with graffiti. So we buy the building, and all of a sudden this guy, like a lemming, is all over us. Oh, you got to do something with that back wall. When people are in Central Park and they look over, it looks like a swamp. Well, wait, we just moved in, so you know, let us catch our breath. Yes, all of it did. So anyway, we had suggested to them, let us put a skin of metal on the whole back of that building. It'll be clean, it'll be neat, it'll be one color, it'll look great. You would have thought that we were talking about dropping a nuclear bomb on Grace Lake.
Really?
Metal? Are you kidding me? That's junk.
They don't understand.
They've not been exposed to it. And they don't, and in a way, you can see both sides of that coin. The village is what it is because they've protected certain thoughts of it, but it's gotten to the point now where you say, at what point does it become an inhibitor instead of an accelerant to moving on?
But you had, just as a side note, you know, being a trustee in the village of Libertyville now, I see that all the time. And one of the things that I like about our board composition that we've had for the past couple of years is we've made some change. We recognize it, and we told our planning committee, change these ordinances.
Sure.
They're out of date. It's 2024.
Sure.
You're acting, you know, metal. If you were sitting in 1985 and you said, oh, I'm going to put metal up, they probably would have, you know, tacked up.
Sure, and you know what? Everybody thinks metal, and they think that Menards building stuff.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, they probably push more metal in the United States than anyone has
they do,
through the years. And it's why? They filled a need.
Yeah.
And it was for cheap enclosure that'd be weather tight.
Right.
But we're not talking that arena anymore. We're talking something that's so sophisticated, architecturally attractive.
Well, that was my point in asking. I mean, you're working with some very, very world-renowned architects.
Absolutely.
I don't want to name anybody or get in trouble.
It's fun though.
I mean, that's serious business, and the buildings are beautiful. I want to ask. We'll get wrapped up here in a second. What are you most proud of with Sheet Metal Supply?
I think the job that Ben and Phoebe have done in building the business. I look at the people we've got there, and for me, I talked before about chasing many when you're young. I love what I do. I love what's happened. The money has followed. I've been very, very fortunate. But one of the proudest things that I am of that is having employees there long enough they weren't even married when they started. Now they've got kids that have graduated from college, and to watch the progression of their families and their families have become my family.
That's awesome. That's beautiful, Phil. Thank you.
That has been the greatest ride.
That's. Thank you for sharing that. I just have some random stuff for you. You have one. You said to me earlier you have 1 foot in the business, 1 foot out. What's next for you?
Well, you get to my age and you struggle with that a little bit. Your focus in life changes, I think, when you get older, and you have enough. You see the results of life and sickness and disability and things like this. So I think it's important to stay healthy. I've taken up bowl lathe work, and I really making bowls, making
okay.
and my grandfather did that when I used to traipse around with him, and he had a lathe that was so primitive that his department had given him when he retired from General Motors, and I don't have it anymore, but that's sort of, he left me. My mother passed and she said, "What do you want that I have?" I said, "I only want the bowls that my grandfather turned for you." And to me, they're works of art. Everyone's individual. So I've really enjoyed that, and I have a little, amongst belly aching at Sheet Metal Supply, I stole a little space in there, and I've got my lathe room in there. Did you?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I hope you saw it after I cleaned it up. I cleaned it up the last few weeks ago.
It looked great.
But anyway, I've really enjoyed that. I like the creativity of that, and it's sort of an outlet for me. I also enjoy riding bikes. I've done a lot of that, and there's freedom. I've been so blessed that since I was 12, this uncle that I referred to before had bought a piece of property up north, and I've been going up there, I think, almost every year since then. And I thought at one time, I'll never be able to afford a place up here, and I've been so fortunate that we did build a place in 2016, and it's the best weeks of my year when Phoebe and her gang come up and Ben and his gang come up and get to actually spend not just hi, we're here for a visit for an hour or two, but spend a week with them, or I wish it'd be a month, but nobody, everybody's too busy for that. But it's so much fun to spend time with them.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Have you ever taught? Have you ever thought of
No,
teaching?
I've thought about that though.
You're so good, man.
Well, I don't know, but I don't. I love to talk, but I don't know how you morph that into being a good teacher.
Well, yeah, we could talk about that for a long time. I think you're so incredibly engaging, and there's a lot of wisdom, and you've had a lot of failures, and you've had a lot of successes, and sharing those with us and telling us a little bit about your story has been just so cool.
Well, I've lived a full life.
Do you write at all?
No, I don't. I love to read. If you could give me
what do you like to read?
Some fiction, some nonfiction, historical fiction. I just finished a book on the collapse of Merrill Lynch.
Oh, really?
In 2008. It was fascinating. And if you want to see how businesses should not be run, look at that entire business.
What's the name of that book? Do you remember?
I will get it for you.
Because I love that stuff.
I was talking to Phoebe's husband, and he said he loves to read too. And he said, "What have you read?" And I told him that, and he said, "That sounds fascinating." I said, "Yeah, let me look back on my Kindle and find out the name of it."
So the interconnectedness between like Merrill and Lehman and all those,
Bear Stearns and all that whole group.
Yeah.
That whole group. You know what struck me as being so bizarre, and so how you don't want to live your life is these guys back in 2008, they were getting annual bonuses of $18-20 million. Now, if the average guy works his ass off for a lifetime and doesn't make an 18th of that, to me, I'm just fascinated by how people could be so absorbed in that culture. That when Merrill finally got to the position where they were so underwater with the bundled mortgages, they booted the CEO. His contract, when he was booted out, he got a $161 million bonus for running them into the ground. It's like,
It's just,
you think
it's
to
like
yourself,
illogical.
it's so illogical, and it's so like, it's the antithesis of the way people would be if I could rule the world. It's like, I'm not a socialist, but I'm very much in favor of you create wealth for yourself, you should enjoy the benefits of that. And I think probably
That would be a capitalist, right?
that
You're
would be
a capitalist.
that would be, and you know what? I think probably the most important message today for young people is have a plan, and you're going to constantly change that plan as you move forward. I mean, if you're on a good plan, tweak it a bit here and there. What went well? What didn't go well? Adjust to it. That's part of being a human as opposed to an ape. And then just keep going on that and fine-tune yourself through life.
Yeah.
Everybody's got value. You read stories about the other side of life, and it's so dire, and you wonder, how do these people end up in these situations? And I guess you'd have to say most of it's self-induced.
Sometimes, yeah. It's how many employees do you guys have?
45, I think, at the moment.
45. What's the longest tenure? Do you know, Phil?
Yeah, I think Fernando's. Phoebe, what do you think? 22 years.
22. Your background, when you talk about the business, and I realize you had to learn it. I mean, you were the guy,
Yeah.
but you have a marketing degree, right?
Yes.
And you've got this marketing, sales talent with engineering, which that's kind of a needle in a haystack. That's a unique thing, Phil.
You know what I've always thought was interesting, and I know how hard my folks lived, and that they sacrificed things that they probably would have enjoyed doing just to provide us a college education. And I think back on, okay, I've got this marketing degree, and I think, okay, what did I get out of that? And to be honest with you, I've learned more on trial and error through my life than I ever did out of a book. And some people learn well through books. I don't think I'm one of those people. I like trying things, and if it doesn't work, well, okay.
You don't lose sleep over it, right?
No,
know,
it's like,
so-
well, sometimes you do. You say, why? I really thought that was going to work, and boy, it sure didn't. But you know what? Number one, nobody gets hurt, and
Yeah,
number
right.
two, you survived it, and
Yeah.
so what went wrong?
Live to fight another day.
Precisely. So so when you say to yourself, to young people thinking about, well, okay, Northwestern now is what, 75 a year?
Oh man, yeah.
Notre Dame is somewhere in that league, and all of these schools are just plain expensive. And you say to yourself, what am I getting out of this?
Yeah.
Something like CLC, where get your feet wet, see what you want to do, find some focus, find some ground for yourself, and then move forward. And you might end up at Harvard. Who knows? If you do, God bless you.
Yeah, right.
But it's not going to cost you $100,000 a year to do it.
Well, one of the things I encourage students, because I used to teach one class for many years and I stopped, but I'm like, you have to explore. And the beauty of CLC is you can afford to explore,
Sure. Yes.
And don't be bashful about changing direction.
Not at all.
I went to nursing. Well, I didn't like that. I went to business. That's okay.
Sure.
Get your feet wet. Make sure you got to explore and discover. It's part of self-discovery. But you were talking about the marketing thing, and I just wanted to mention my friend Dimitri, who owns the Shanty.
Uh-huh.
He always tells this story, and I love it. He's so passionate, and he's so good at what he does, and I think he's a master in marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And he studied art.
Isn't that interesting?
And he said, I learned more in studying art than I ever did in my marketing classes.
Uh-huh.
you know, about aesthetics and beauty and what's compelling. And I love the way he talks about that. And I brought him in to talk to my students one time, and he mentioned that. So you never know. You never know.
You know, I find it interesting. Phoebe had a degree in art history.
Oh, I didn't know that.
What she does for a living, she is so good at that it's like, I don't know where she got the skill set from, because it.
Have you asked her?
I probably should ask her something. I'm going to ask her that today. But she is so good.
Because I'm curious now.
She is so enjoining with people. She's very open with them. I think she's very honest with them. If it's good news or bad news, Phoebe will deliver it with panache, and but always with a focus on, let's be better. We can do this. Let's get together. Let's figure this out. We can do this. And if we have a problem, what's the core of the problem? What are the options for solution? And let's figure it out.
Yeah.
We're all able to do that. She does that. It's remarkable what she does. Ben, on the other hand, does what he does very, very well. And he had a degree in agriculture. It's like, and I think to myself, okay, all that money I sent up to University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I've got an art history major and a guy in ag.
Where did Phoebe go?
Madison. Yeah,
Okay,
she went to University of Wisconsin-Madison too.
You know, that speaks to something, and I could riff on this all day with you. I could talk to you all day. It's been super engaging, Phil, so thank you. But
I've enjoyed it, thank you.
you know, I was thinking about college and education, and with all this AI stuff and technology, I love the technology stuff, but I have a theory. The more tech we get, the more the humanities and the more kind of handmade craftsmanship type stuff in life is going to make a comeback. Some of it already has.
Really?
That's my theory.
I hope you're right.
I hope I am too. Part of it's
You
just
know,
hope.
part of humanity needs that.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think
mean,
so.
To me, AI is this nebulous cloud up here that you worry, is it going to dump rain? Is it going to dump snow? Is it going to dump sunshine? And
All
at
of the
this
above,
point,
yeah.
and I'm sure it's going to be all of the above, but you don't know what in what concentration.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
to me,
true.
that's
But I think about the education that you mentioned. So Phoebe and Ben went to Madison. As I was thinking about education, I thought, you know, they got a good, I presume, they got a really good holistic education, which then helps them on the skill sets that you need that maybe weren't a focus in that education, but it's just like, it's like conditioning of you know, I always say, if you do this college thing right, you will wake up 2 or 3 years after you graduate, and you're going to say to yourself, oh my gosh, I'm a lifelong learner. I just love learning. My curiosity is like supercharged now.
you figured it out.
You know?
Because that is all of life, is learning. And at 77 years old, there's so much left to learn.
Yeah.
So many interesting things, so many important things. But don't ever lose your curiosity.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. Man, I would love to have coffee with you again, maybe a beer. I don't know if you're a beer guy, but
Either one.
I'd love
I'd
to
enjoy
visit
it.
your shop.
Yeah.
And when you're there,
Yes.
because I'd love to see some of your bowls and stuff. But let's do this again in some form or fashion.
I would
Phil.
enjoy that.
And I just really appreciate you taking the time, being open, sharing as much as you have. It's been a cool journey.
It's been my good fortune.
So
Thank you.
thanks, Phil.
Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate your time.
All right, George, that's a wrap. That was a little bouncy. But
Yeah, it was all over the
Yeah,
place,
I
but
love
it worked out well.
I love
yeah.
it. I love it.
Jim,
Yeah.
didn't I tell you he's the best person to talk
Oh,
to?
well.
I was like, you don't have to.
He likes to talk a lot.
Well,